Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. Can I just check mic's working? You can hear me all right? Yeah, good, brilliant. You hear me online as well? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you all for coming today. This will be a very quick introduction from me. I'm Scott Davidson, Deputy Director of Social Responsibility and Sustainability at the University. And I have the great privilege of welcoming Professor John Robinson to our university today. He happened to be over for the ISCN conference in Lausanne and had very kindly agreed to pop up here on the way back. Dave and John go back some time, and I've had the privilege of a few meetings with John over the last couple of years. And I have to say, there aren't many people in sustainability that really blow my socks off, that really impressed me. Johan Rockström last year was one of them, and I think many of you seen why. John Robinson is another one who genuinely, every time I speak to him, I come away with just endless amounts of ideas of how to improve my communications, how to improve what I'm doing. And what John's going to speak to us today a bit about is how we can shorten the radius, as John puts it, in how we set up our governance in this side of things. It's going to be about 20, 30 minutes, something like that, presentation, and then there'll be plenty of time for discussion and Q&A afterwards. So without further ado, please welcome John.
Scott, Dave. How about now? Nice to see you, Dave. Hope you're feeling better. And nice to meet you, Wendy. Hopefully see you in person soon. So I'm really happy to be here because Edinburgh is one of my favorite places. Our daughter-in-law, one of our daughters-in-law grew up here. And I've also always been a fan of how sustainability has been approached here, because it came through the social responsibility door, which is very unusual, right? Most universities come through the environmental door, but the history here is rather different. So that's kind of interesting, especially because as we're learning, we simply can't address sustainability if we don't address equity and social justice in deep ways. It just won't work. Start having that history of social responsibility is, I think, a really useful asset that can be utilized. So what I want to talk about, when I was talking with Scott and Dave about this, we talked about how do we up our game in sustainability. And it just happened that the ISCN conference was last week in Lausanne, and I was asked to do the opening keynote on that exact topic. So being lazy, I proposed that I would start with that same presentation here, and hopefully it has some relevance. The idea is that we all exist in institutional supertankers. Higher education institutions, universities are supertankers with very long turning radiuses. We've all beat our head against the brick wall of trying to move our universities. And so the question is, how do we shorten that turning radius? How do we create much more substantial change more quickly? So that's what I want to talk about, but I guess I'm doing this. No, maybe. Okay. This isn't working, right? Oh, now it is. That was my fault. I didn't push it hard enough, I think. Or your presence may have been sufficient. So I want to start with the question. So this is 2024. Okay. That end of presentation. Did you push a button or no? So something happened. There we go. Oh, is that the advance? Oh, this is also an advance here, right? Yeah, okay. But that's kind of awkward. Eh? Okay. So this is 2024, and what have we done? Well, actually, we've done a lot. if you look back at the last 30 or 40 years when sustainability programming has been established at universities, a lot of people have really worked hard to do a lot of stuff, and there's been some very cool stuff done. However, not enough, and not fast enough. And I want to illustrate that idea with just 3 questions. How many of our institutions have committed to be net positive, not net zero, net positive in carbon or energy, let alone all the other dimensions of sustainability? What proportion of our undergraduates have some component of sustainability built into their programs? And how much of the research done at our institutions is focused on working with off-campus partners to contribute to the sustainability transition? I think the answer in most places, and certainly here, is some, but we're not quite there, right? There's more to do. This is my own feeling. We need to transform our curricula. This is university-wide. The whole system needs to be transformed. Interestingly enough, not in the ways you might think, not with a whole bunch of mandatory courses. I don't think that's the way to go. But I think we do need to transform our curricula. We need to do a lot more transdisciplinary work based on principles of knowledge co-production and all the co's, you know, co-creation, co-management, co-design, you know, all the co's, in different places and different scales. We need much more of this kind of work. We need to convert our campuses into living labs that are net positive in both human and environmental terms. I don't think we should be building buildings that don't make people happier, healthier, and more productive, and improve the environment, not just be less bad. And I think we need to act as strong agents of change in the world. Most universities don't necessarily have a super positive reputation, especially in many communities, marginalized communities, and so on. So there's an agenda, if you like. I want to say that I think we can approach these questions, and they'll take different forms, of course, in different places. Can best start with a clear expression of what we mean by sustainability. As we know, sustainability is what Galley called an essentially contested concept, a concept that cannot be resolved with more information into a clear single definition. Truth, beauty, justice, sustainability, these are essentially contested concepts. So it's quite important, therefore, how the institution defines sustainability out of the many different options available. I think much of the sustainability literature is defined by what I call a limits storyline. It's a storyline that says, you know, humans are a cancer on the planet and destroying everything, and so we have to just do less of everything. It's about harm reduction, it's about damage limitation, it's about mitigation, it's about cutting back, often explicitly, and this is really sort of sociologically interesting, it's explicitly about sacrifice. A bunch of dominant metaphors, one indirectly referred to by Scott a minute ago, the planetary boundaries hypothesis. That's one such metaphor, and I believe it's important to recognize these are metaphors. They are not, in fact, the second law of thermodynamics. They're metaphors. Another metaphor is the ecological footprint, and the basic idea of all of these is, you know, here we are, a planet and a half already, things are getting worse. We have to somehow torque things down to one planet living, right? So there's a bunch of these very powerful and prevalent understandings. I think there's 4 problems with this, not as applicable to individual circumstances. There's lots of limits and boundaries and constraints in the world, ranging from stream capacities to cultural capabilities, on both the environmental and the human side. But as an overarching cultural narrative, as the basic way we think about sustainability, I think there's some real problems with this limits storyline. First problem is, and this is a really important one, it's not very motivating. We know we have to basically engage the whole planet. Every person on the planet has to be engaged. We're not going to achieve our goals say, retrofitting houses in Toronto, if we don't engage homeowners at a level we've never engaged them before, including people who don't trust the city very much, for example. People don't jump onto the bandwagon of doing without and leap to the forefront of the social movement of cutting back. It's not an engaging agenda. And if we actually have to engage massively, that's a problem. It's a serious problem. I think that's one problem. The second problem, to me, is it doesn't go far enough anyway. There's a lot of restoration that is needed. There's lots of things that don't just have to be stopped, but things that have to be improved in a lot of people's lives and in a lot of the planet's lives. So I think we have to go beyond harm reduction and damage limitation, beyond net zero. As expressed in the ecological footprint and the planetary boundaries hypothesis or approach are good illustrations of this. It's almost always expressed in primarily environmental terms. So the whole social side becomes a way of achieving the environmental goal. But as we know, the term sustainability was coined in the early 1980s, popularized by the Brundtland Commission in '87, precisely in order to get outside the environmental box and to recognize that these crucial social and economic dimensions, and they are deeply interpenetrating. We can't solve any one of them in isolation. So it's a problem if we keep defaulting to the environmental, as if that's the big issue, and everything else is secondary. And then finally, I think this way of thinking, this limits storyline, is quite scientistic. It has a very unproblematic view of science and technology and often defaults into a sort of technocratic and technically oriented understanding of what needs to be done. This is interesting because we have 150 years of science and technology studies that tells us a very different story about the role of science in society than is contained in most of the sustainability literature. Why are we ignorant of that whole history and tradition? Why aren't we using it? Because it's incredibly powerful, I believe. So that's a fourth concern. Therefore, I think at this level of overarching public narrative, cultural narrative that we present ourselves to the world with, I think we need a different story. And so my proposal is something we call regenerative sustainability, where we look for human activities that don't have to be minimized because they're damaging, either to people or the planet, but human activities that simultaneously increase, improve both human and environmental well-being, simultaneously do that. So two differences from the limits narrative that I described above. It's inescapably both human and environmental, always, every time. There's no environmental issue that doesn't have human dimensions. There's no human issue that doesn't have environmental dimensions. We live on this world. We interpenetrate with it. So everything has to be both all the time. Well, you get 15 minutes a day to just do one or the other, but the rest of the time they've always got to be integrated. And secondly, net positive, not net zero. You can see how this could be a much more appealing narrative to people. I've given talks on regenerative sustainability, not this talk, to public audiences, and I've had people come up to me and say, no one has ever told me things could be better. Think about that for a minute. What is the story we have been purveying? If the public out there has never been told things could be better, like, that's crazy, I think. And we're at fault, because we've purveyed this chicken little, sky is falling, climate emergency kind of thinking all the time. We keep pounding people's noses into it. So if we instead start talking a little bit about how we can make things better, maybe the resistance might be slightly less. Maybe people actually get excited about the prospects. Okay, so with that as backdrop, here's how I would turn those four issues I raised earlier on into a sort of an agenda. On teaching and learning, I think we need to reach the rest. Right now at U of T, 4% of our undergraduates have sustainability as a major. It's the other 96% we have to reach. And the reason is simple. The idea of green jobs is a crazy idea because it implies there are non-green jobs. Every job in the world is in the world and involves people. Every job in the world has sustainability dimensions. There's nothing that doesn't. All our students can use some degree, not majoring in sustainability, but some understanding of sustainability that they can carry into their job and be an agent of change in those occupations, whatever they might be. So, reach the rest. Most of the research at the universities I've been at, you can tell me if this is true here, is focused on what you might call a researcher-led, more extractive approach to research, where the world is a source of data, basically, for the research, and the fundamental audience is academic. Right? That's the standard approach, and that's how we're taught. That's how we're taught to do research. I think in the sustainability arena, I'm not talking here about medieval philosophers or high-energy physicists, but people doing sustainability work, I think we need to move in the direction of more reciprocal approaches, where the world is partner. Both the human and non-human world is actually a partner, not just a source of data, based on what you might call deep interdisciplinarity and, as I said earlier, transdisciplinary knowledge co-production and change co-creation. So highly applied. Really, it's about changing the world, right? That's why we're here, is to do that. That's our job, to contribute to that. We may not actually do that, but it's our job to contribute, to create an environment in which our students can learn how to do that. Our faculty can start to do that. Our staff can be involved in doing that, and so on. On operations, move away from net zero goals on energy and carbon, because that's almost all of them are A, only net zero, and B, only energy and or carbon, to net positive environmental and human goals. As I said, let's not build any buildings that don't make people healthier, happier, more productive, and actually improve the environmental circumstances. Give back environmentally. And take an active role as institutions promoting, supporting, and creating change in the outside world. Okay, all this is easy to say, right? Anybody can stand up and talk about what needs to be done. What I want to do is talk a little bit about institutional culture change. And one reason that this kind of agenda is hard is because of this dominant culture in higher education institutions. And that agenda, and again, that culture, and again, rely on you to tell me if this applies here, the same way it does at University of Toronto, UBC, ASU, MIT, Utrecht, and a bunch of other universities. Actually, Dave will argue that it applies here because he was part of the process I'm going to talk about in a minute. So what is this culture? As we know, it's based on values of disciplinary teaching and research. That's heartland, right? That's right at the center of the academic enterprise, is this idea of disciplinary teaching and research. Interdisciplinarity is at the margins, like literally at the margins of the disciplines often. What that means is it's based on the idea of the individual control of research agendas. Faculty are promoted, they receive promotion and tenure based on their ability to demonstrate that they individually have made some kind of original creative contribution to their field, right? They can't be promoted without that. So this individual control of research agendas is baked into the whole performance evaluation process for faculty. This, in turn, leads to pretty active resistance to any external influence on teaching or research agendas. Some of you may have had this experience dealing with faculty. Remember, as faculty, what are our two skills? Our two skills are lecturing to captive audiences. Here I am, sorry. And engaging in internecine intellectual warfare with our colleagues, right? Those are our two big skills. Not really a basis for collegiality, right? The academic culture. And this resistance is huge. All important decisions at the university are academic decisions, so they have to be made by academics. So you give them to an assistant dean that's been in the job 2 minutes, who makes all the decisions over professional staff who have been 20 years doing this work. Right? It's a very bizarre culture. When I hire somebody from off campus who hasn't worked in the university, I know it's going to be a year before they understand how bizarre universities are. So this is all part of the culture. Our operational practices are largely unconnected to the academic mission of the university, a different world, or to larger societal priorities. And we have a principle of non-engagement. I've had presidents of universities tell me, we don't engage. Our faculty engage, our research centers engage, but we don't, as an institution, engage. So disengagement. That culture is built into the job descriptions, the institutional standards, the performance evaluation criteria, and all the other institutional rules that govern what people actually do on Monday morning. The big barriers to sustainability are never technical, I believe, never economic, often look economic. They're job descriptions and performance evaluation criteria, and codes of practice and professional standards and regulatory requirements. It's those rules, institutional rules, that determine what you do in your job. So the culture is critical. And if the culture is even mildly dismissive of, let alone actively hostile to what we're trying to achieve, that makes life more difficult. That in turn suggests we need to focus a lot of our attention on this question of governance. And I have 3 questions to ask here. Where is sustainability located in the university system? Who's accountable and to whom? That's a really crucial question. Who reports to whom? And what do we mean by accountability anyway? Certainly academics aren't accountable to the university. And how does it interact with other institutional priorities? Sustainability isn't the only game in town. There's tons of other things going on. So I think those questions deserve some thought. And this led us to an experience that Dave was part of, where we said, let's look at how sustainability is governed at 10 universities around the world that have strong sustainability programs. So you can see them on the map there: UBC, Arizona State, MIT, University of Toronto, Sao Paulo, here, Utrecht, Cape Town, Hong Kong, and Monash. The original plan was we had funding to send student interns to each of those other 9 universities to interview and try and figure out what's going on, how are things working, what's working well, and so on. We did that in the first year. We had an intern who came here, and we had one that went to Utrecht, but then COVID hit. So all successive discussion was online. So we didn't have the visits. It's just too bad, because that was half the point of the exercise, is get these students to be able to go and actually absorb another institutional culture. But anyway, we persevered back and forth. Dave will remember many texts floating around, comments, and so on. And we came up with a paper, which was published a couple of years ago in the International Journal for Sustainability in Higher Education, called Odd Couples. And one of the key things we found across the 10 universities was this disjuncture between the operational side of the university and the academic side of the university, right? I call it the pyramid and the plane. Oh, sorry, let me back up. We were focusing on governance, so we were focusing on distributed governance approaches versus central coordination. That's a central issue for universities. And it kept coming up in the context of this operational academic split. And as I said, I call this the pyramid and the plane. So down on the operational side, and here I'm including not just the people running the buildings, but academic administrators, right, running curriculum. So that's all operational. It's a pyramid. People actually have job descriptions. They actually have bosses. They report up. They're accountable. If the president of the university says something, they try to do it. That's the pyramid. And that's normal in the rest of the world too, right? Organizational pyramids are very common. But then up on the academic side, we have the infinite plane of the faculty, none of whom work for the university. I've never met a faculty member who thinks they work for the university. The university gives me an office, that's nice. gives me a salary. That's really, important, but I'm in charge of my destiny, my research. Don't talk to me if you don't have a PhD kind of mentality, because, et cetera. You've, I'm sure, run into this endlessly. So that's interesting, eh? Very different reward systems, very different time constants. How do you deal with that? Well, I can testify at UBC, where I was for 22 years. I ended up as Associate Provost Sustainability there, and at U of T, where I've been since 2016. When you bring these two together, you get this amazing explosion of creative energy. It's incredibly powerful if we can actually do this. And so this becomes, in our discussion in the paper, a crucial issue is how do you navigate that relationship? How do you build strong bridges? How do you work together in an active kind of way? In the paper, we end up with 5 governance principles based on looking at these 10 universities. And I want to add to that 3 principles based on just my own experience at UBC, at U of T, at Utrecht, and at Copenhagen Business School. Well, and some others as well, ULB in Brussels and stuff. So 8 governance principles. What I want to do is just walk really quickly through each of the 8, and I just want to give you an example of how that principle might be operationalized. So these are all examples from my own experience. They're not intended to be prescriptive. They're certainly not comprehensive. They're just illustrative. They're just an example of the kind of thing you might do if you took these principles seriously. So the idea is just to spark discussion. So create a narrative. I've already gone on and on about this, so I won't say much more except to say it's had a huge impact at U of T. We have a climate positive plan. Our governing council has approved a plan that will mean we're going to reduce emissions more than we emit. We're going to be net positive in carbon emissions before 2050. It's costed, every single piece of it. All the engineering details are known. We know exactly what has to happen to get below 0. And that came out of this idea that it's not enough to be net 0. I can tell you, when we talk about this to donors, to the public at large, to our partners in the city, they're impressed with the ambition of this idea. We're developing new sustainability design standards for capital projects, so new buildings. This is the existing, this is what we call facilities and services. I think you call it estates, but same sort of idea. But we also have a planning and design unit within the university. So what about new buildings? We're developing sustainability design standards, and my big hope is these will be net positive too. Every new building will be designed to be net positive in both human and environmental terms, unless there are overriding reasons where that's not possible. U of T did something I still don't understand because it's so countercultural. U of T is very siloed, very disciplinary, very smug. It's quite an unattractive culture, actually, in some ways. I mean, it's great, of course, but it has some unattractive features. But it created these institutional strategic initiatives, ISIs. There's about 20 of them. And they are completely horizontal. Sort of like what John Holmberg did at Chalmers University. If you know the areas of advance that he created that cut across all the engineering disciplines horizontally. Well, this is kind of what these ISIs are. And money was given to them. So there was one that was created by an engineering faculty member called Clean Energy ISI. And we convinced them to turn it into a climate positive ISI. 140 faculty across the whole university are involved in the climate positive ISI, doing research on how to be climate positive. So that's kind of cool on the research side. Here's a project I'm very involved in. We're working with a low-income, highly racialized, marginalized community in Eastern Toronto. And we're taking a net positive approach to thinking about the future of that community. And I can tell you the reaction is very positive. They're so used to being seen in almost entirely negative terms. All the risks, all the vulnerabilities, all the problems, all the challenges. So just some examples of the kinds of things that can happen on the ground when you change the narrative. Principle, or number 2, again, I've already talked about this, just some examples. So at U of T, we have 3 sustainability offices in each of our 3 campuses, but we also have a President's Advisory Committee on Environment, Climate Change, and Sustainability. And that committee has the institution-wide, the whole institution approach mandate for sustainability. And that committee I've been chairing for a number of years, and a few years ago the president said to me, I think you should have a co-chair. And that co-chair should be the chief operating officer of the university, in charge of all facilities and services. So he's got about 150 staff, all the building, operations, landscaping, all that kind of physical stuff is under him. So we are now co-chairs, thus walking the talk a little bit about this integration. And I can tell you, we meet every few weeks, and everything is about how to integrate, and especially how to involve students in that integration, because students are the best way to accomplish that integration, I believe. So it's been unbelievable, partly because he has this huge budget, which is nice, but just working together with a common desire to really create that linkage has been wonderful. The committee itself, last year, because we're just reorganizing now, 10 staff, 9 faculty, 2 students, and an alum. That's, again, trying to have this connection between the operational and the academic built into everything we do. And we've done about 200 campus as living lab projects, all of which are in a database, accessible, searchable, keyed to the SDGs, with the idea that you build on what's gone before. Don't reinvent the wheel. If you're going to do a project on Scope 3, look at whatever other projects there have been on Scope 3 and make sure you're moving from that base. So just, again, some examples of how that can be done. Many other possibilities, of course. Embedding. Embedding is, oh, sorry. You can't read that, but I'm supposed to let you know this is being recorded, so consider yourself informed. So the basic idea here is, as long as we're doing it, it's not working. As long as CECCS is doing it, it's not working. We want to embed sustainability out there throughout the whole university, so it happens automatically. It's the default. As long as we're trying to change things, we're failing. Or we're not there yet, might be a politer way of putting it. So here is the org chart of the senior staff in all 9 vice presidential portfolios and the president's office. Okay, so these are all people. Each box is a person. The dark green are members of CECCS itself, the committee, and the sort of purple color are members of our subcommittee that aren't members of the committee. The committee members are all appointed by the president, by the way. But I want to draw your attention to the light blue, which, as you can see, is almost everybody else. Those light blue are senior staff at the university that we are actively working with to embed sustainability into their jobs in some way or other. If you add in the people we're working with in the decanal offices, the faculty, the dean's offices, which aren't shown here, we're working with 184 staff across the university to embed sustainability in some kind of way into what they do. Not tell them what to do, but figure out how it could be part of their job description to do this kind of stuff. Because that's when you succeed, when it happens automatically, by default. So this is an important map for us. Principle 4, curricula. This is the reaching the rest point. We have this set up this 3-tier system. Any undergraduate can become a sustainability citizen, and that label goes on their co-curricular record, if they do certain co-curricular things about sustainability. And we work with Student Life, which is a big operation on campus of all the student services, to monitor that. So you can become a sustainability citizen. You can become a sustainability scholar if you do a minor or a certificate in sustainability, not a major. This is aimed at everybody else. And then the term sustainability scholar goes on the transcript if you do that. And then if you do both of the other two plus a capstone experience of some kind, you can become a sustainability leader. So this is fully implemented. All undergraduates at U of T can do this. This where we have to work at the faculty level because certificates and minors aren't chosen by the university, they're chosen at the faculty level. We've got 4 faculties, 66% of all our undergraduates can now do this, and by September it'll be 86% when one of the other suburban campuses comes on board. Once we get these fully established, we'll run out the leader program, so it doesn't yet quite exist. The idea is this is not mandatory. I think if you want to turn people off sustainability, one way to do that is offer mandatory sustainability courses, which students in general hate because they don't see the connection to their program, right? It's just an additional requirement. We can have that debate because there's strong feelings on both sides of that issue. But we've chosen the non-mandatory. Make it available to everybody. See how many take it up. That's giving you some intelligence that mandatory courses don't give you. And then what do you have to do to make it more attractive? Becomes the next question. Community engagement, transdisciplinarity. We think there's a lot of early career faculty and postdocs and PhD students who want to do this kind of reciprocal community-led work in and with community, but they're not trained in it because they often come out of disciplinary backgrounds that train them in more extractive research. So we're running workshops aimed at these 3 categories on how to do this kind of work. We did the first one last fall. We did an online one in the winter. We're going to do stage 2 this coming fall. So we think there's quite a demand out there for learning how to do this kind of work. So we want to build capacity. Long-term vision. I can't give you a U of T example, so I'm giving you a UBC one. We did a 20-year sustainability strategy in 2014. I think these are important because they give a trajectory and a way to check how you're doing when you have a 20-year plan, as opposed to just a bunch of goals. So I'm a big fan of that, but we don't have one at U of T yet. Inventories. Principle 7, you manage what you measure. You've all heard that saying a million times. Well, what do we measure? We now have 8 inventories we maintain on an ongoing basis. How many undergraduate courses have sustainability content? When we define sustainability content as meaning they address one or more of the SDGs, well, 25% of our 8,000 courses we offer every year, 25% of them have sustainability content. Experiential learning courses. How many courses are putting students out into the community doing experiential learning with sustainability content? Well, over 100 courses, all across the university. How many student groups? Well, we have about 800 student groups on campus, and 30% of them have a sustainability focus. Who knew? How many master's theses and PhD dissertations have sustainability content? 30% every year, without any central coordination. This is spontaneous expression of interest, right? Graduate programs. 70% of our undergraduate programs address one or more aspects of sustainability. 86% of our research units. How about grad courses? Well, it's almost exactly the same as undergrad. And how about School of Continuing Studies? Over half of their offerings are sustainability related. Once you have this data, then you can start doing things like how many faculty are there teaching sustainability? They're potential allies, right? You don't know that until you have the inventory. Programs, student clubs, huge resource. So that gives you some data. Final principle, student leadership. We've been thinking about this for a long time. We used to call it student engagement, and then our students said, that's way too weak. We want student leadership. So we now have created a subcommittee in the CECCS called Student Leadership, and we're going to engage the students in trying to think strategically about sustainability at the university. We've been for some time engaging students in research and publications. This is a paper we published a few years ago, 2019, I guess, in sustainability. And basically, it's 5 undergraduate students and myself. And those 5 students did our first course inventory. And so I said, well, you should present this somewhere. Why don't you go to the ISCN conference in Stockholm, where it was that year? So they submitted an abstract, they got approval, they all 5 of them went and presented the paper. Then we said, well, why don't we turn it into a paper? So we turned it into paper, published in Sustainability, and later that year, HEI, so ISCN conference, HEI, the other type of similar organization, gave it a paper award later that year. Undergraduates, we should be involving them much more actively, I believe, in research and engagement activities. The clubs I already mentioned. We run workshops for our senior undergraduates in how to be an agent of change when you leave the university. In whatever employment you have, how can you push the sustainability button in that company or NGO or whatever it is. Okay, so those are the 8 principles. I want to sort of finish off by talking just for a minute or two about how do you get to work? Say you like some of these principles, you want to pursue them. They're just principles. How do you create change in these big super tankers? And we developed, when we built a building called the Center for Interactive Research on Sustainability, a building, by the way, that was designed to be net positive in operational carbon, structural carbon, energy and water quality, and health, productivity, and happiness. 7 net positive goals. Opened its doors in 2011. We achieved 5 of the 7 goals. So, but it took us 11 years to get the building built. I don't recommend that, but we learned a lot in the process. So these 5 metaphors came out of that as ways of creating change at your university. And the first betrays my age, the age of vinyl. Needle in the groove. This is the path dependence thing. That we want to create new grooves, right? So we want to move the needle, but it keeps falling back. And every time you hear somebody say, "Oh, if it's not broke, don't fix it," that's that, right? It's totally broken. Like lots is broken in our culture, and so we need new grooves. So the key here is perseverance. You got to actually hold the needle over the place, and you got to be there continuously as it digs a new groove and gets some gravity aid of its own. So perseverance, visibility is important, multi-level approach and so on. Plate spinning. There were 8 offices at UBC that could prevent this building being built. None of those 8 could make it happen because it wasn't their job. In fact, they were in weird and wonderful, financial management over here, or IP over there. I can't remember what they were, but they were strange places, but they could stop us in their tracks. So what we had to do is visit each of them frequently enough to give the plate a spin, because if the plate falls off, you're doomed. So plate spinning. Identify those places in your institution that can stop you doing what you're doing and work with them, because they have a mandate, right? They have a responsibility, they have some power. So identify that. It's actually a sort of countercultural, because you think it's all the ones about, say, the specific program, but it's often very different offices in the university. So identify those and build some bridges. Give the plate a spin. Bricklaying. Every meeting, you got to add a brick to the wall. That means every meeting you come with something to report. That is progress, because if you're static, you're dead. You've got to have momentum. It's got to start to seem inevitable. The best example of this was someone came to me in 2010 or 9 and said, "Oh, I want to visit the building." Construction hadn't even started. This person thought it already existed. What a success. That's what you want. You want this sense of inevitable development. This is coming. It's happening. This is inevitable and unavoidable. But you got to have that brick. You got to have something to report, something to say at every key meeting with senior decision makers, for example. We almost died one time, and I was meeting with the provost, and I knew the meeting was to kill the building. So I brought along a vice president from BC Hydro, who was giving us $5 million for the building. Changed the whole context of the meeting, and we survived. So that was a big brick, right? They don't have to always be that, but they have to be something. Okay. Mosaic. All these different partners, all these different offices and off-campus partners, fundraising partners, but also people who are going to work with you. They're all the chips in the mosaic. We have to be the grout. We have to be the cement, connecting all of these things. That means a lot of attention to what their agenda is, who they are, how they operate. You got to really think hard about how to build those partnerships. And finally, wallflower. So many people are just watching the dance. They're at the wall. How do you get them into the dance? Get them off the wall, join the dance. I think this means you got to offer them something that fits their pre-existing agenda. This isn't moral suasion. Oh, you should do this. It's a good thing, et cetera, et cetera. No, this is, join the dance, and this will benefit you in this way. So look for ways in which the pre-existing agenda of all the potential partners can be enhanced in some kind of way. Okay, sorry, going on too long. Let me end. Institutional issues are as important as the substantive ones. We have to change the rules of the game. In other words, not just win the game, we actually have to change the rules of the game and win a different game than we're in, because the university game is pretty boring, right? It's not interesting. We're in the sustainability game. How do we change the rules of the game? Hold the needle up, spin the plates, lay the bricks, create the mosaics, join the dance. Common thread, continuous engagement. You can't ever let up. And that often means trading off. Not everybody can be 24/7 on every issue, so you got to work with your team and really try to create that continuous engagement. The really positive thing, everybody younger than me, which I think is everybody in this room, has been brought up with sustainability pretty much through the whole of your schooling, right? There's nobody who's unaware of it as an issue, and there's nobody who says, oh, I'm really for unsustainability. It's not the case. So there's this massive latent demand out in our institutions of people in middle and junior management careers and positions, and certainly students who would love to be doing more, but they don't know how. And they're not given permission. I think leadership is fundamentally about giving permission, not about controlling or directing. Giving permission to people to do stuff they're actually quite inclined to do. So this latent demand for change is a resource we should be very consciously tapping, especially in our students. Our students are the most powerful resource we have in this regard, I think. And that feeds into this. I tell my staff, we don't actually do anything. We don't teach the courses in CECCS. We don't run the buildings. We don't do the research. We enable, foster, facilitate, empower, encourage. Enabling is an incredibly powerful role. And we're just a committee. How inoffensive can you be? We can float above all the vice presidential portfolios. We can go anywhere. We're not threatening to anybody. We're not in one portfolio, so if we go to another one, we're sort of poaching and, trespassing. No, we're just a committee. We're just coming to talk to you. It's a very powerful position to be in, I think. And success, finally. Success, I think, is when, as I said earlier, it's about normalizing sustainability so it becomes the default, not the change. So when people say we have to make sustainability sexy, my answer is no, we have to make it invisible. It's just automatic, just happens. Give you an example. We build a new building, and I bet this is true here. Nobody says, oh, gee, labor code, too expensive. Let's not do the labor code for this building. Health and safety standards, oh, can't afford those, we're just going to cut them out, right? They've been normalized, they're automatic, they're default. Nobody thinks about whether they're going to do them, they just do them. Sustainability, not so much, right? How do we move it into that kind of status? Okay, sorry, I've been blurting away at you too long. So that's it, thanks.
Thank you so much. See lots of applause on the screen here as well. We have around 10 minutes for questions, and I'm sure your minds are popping with lots of them. So I won't spend any time summarising anything like that. Just go straight to questions. We've got Gonzalo's just asking, would it be possible to share the slides?
Of course, yeah,
Brilliant.
No problem.
Yep.
They're here on the desktop, I think, so they can easily, and I can send them to you. Yeah,
Great,
no problem.
thank you. Who's up first? Kim. Is that me?
Who knows?
Hi, thank you very much for the very informative presentation. I think I just have a very, very quick question. It sounded as if we have to mobilize everyone. Is that really the case, or is it also sufficient if there's a critical mass?
Yeah, I think that's right. It is a critical mass. If you move away from the approach taken to behavior change in economics and psychology, which is about conscious individual choice, into a more anthropological and sociological understanding of social practices, then you realize that a lot of what we do is actually unconscious and collective, and we carry those practices. So people don't actually choose. We brush our teeth. We don't make a conscious decision every day, weigh the costs and benefits and so on. It's just a practice we carry. We probably had it instilled by our parents many years ago. And if we don't for a day, or don't have a shower for a day, wow, we feel uncomfortable. Even if no one else can notice, these are deeply ingrained, these practices. So how do we create these norms of what's the automatic expected practice? It doesn't mean going one by one to every individual. It means somehow operating at moving the locus of agency up from the individual to the more collective state. So whether that's critical mass or whether that's institutional standards that become promulgated, whether it's word of mouth processes, and there's many different ways, right, that this can happen. But eventually people do it without even paying attention to the fact that they're doing it. So I think at some level, yes, we want to engage everybody, but we don't have to engage them one by one in terms of changing their minds. The information on information is unambiguous. Information doesn't change behavior. We know that. We have 60 years of research in about 5 different fields that information doesn't change behavior. And yet we keep doing literacy programs, carbon literacy, climate literacy, trying to educate people about climate change as if that's we know it's not going to change their behavior. The best evidence that it's not going to change their behavior is that we have 60 years of evidence that it's not, and we completely ignore that evidence. So we're exactly illustrating the failure of the information deficit model. So we need different ways, and they don't involve one by one. They involve thinking at this more collective level. What in a department are the institutional norms about publications in, say, the English department? They're very strong and deep, but nobody is individually deciding whether to partake. That's just part of the culture, right? When you're hired, you're in that culture. So how do we work at that level? It's not that it's easy. I'm not saying, this is the light bulb that solves the problem, but I do think it changes the question a little bit. So who are the influential leaders, both from below and from above? How do you create the pincer movement between top down and bottom up? Where are job descriptions formulated? I think that's a really powerful one. And so on. Sorry, going on and on.
No problem. So the inventories look amazing, and I'd love to do that. But I just want to find out how a course is considered sustainable, particularly considering that different schools have very different approaches to what is a sustainable course. So how is that decided?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of letting 100 flowers bloom on this issue and not being too prescriptive. So what we'd said is, based on what's online about the course, because a really bad mistake universities make is that syllabi are not public documents. They're owned by faculty. That's crazy. We're public servants. We should all be public. But anyway, what's online is usually only a paragraph or so about the course. Searching that for keywords related to the SDGs. That's all we've done so far. So it's by no means satisfactory, fully satisfactory, but it's a first step. So we know which courses are addressing SDG 1 in some explicit way, because if it makes it into that short description, it's obviously in the course. Well, should be in the course. So that's what we do.
Hi, so I'm really happy and pleased to hear about everything that you said about getting more students involved and how powerful students can be. I have a feeling I might be the only student in this room, but correct me if I'm wrong. I'm one of the student representatives at the union, and I would just love to hear like more examples of where students can be involved. Like that conference sounds fantastic. So yeah, where else can we put students in the room?
I think the most important place for me is the Campus as a Living Lab projects. So I teach a course where I go out to the operational staff of the university and I say, what sustainability list is on your, or issue is on your to-do list, but you don't have the bandwidth to address it. But if you had 4 students working away for a term, that would be very helpful to you. So the problems come entirely from the practitioner side, not from me, not from the literature. And the students meet every week with that person and do a report on that problem. So they're real world problems. They're more likely to be implemented because they're the actual problem the person themselves suggested. And I just sort of coach the process. We have 200 of those projects now in a database that's public. They're all downloadable. They're coded by SDG. So I think Campus as a Living Lab is a real way forward. The other one is experiential learning, finding courses where students can go out into the community, so not campus, but out in the community to do real world projects with partner NGOs, community-based organizations, whoever. We started with course-based approaches because we didn't have any money. But at UBC, we had some money, so we actually hired interns, and we're starting that now at U of T too. So you can sort of pay students with course credit or with money, right? Summer job, say. So those are 2 routes to get students deeply engaged in real-world problem solving that helps build their network, because we all know sending in job applications is worse than useless these days. So build their network, get to know the client, organizations, and the people in it, and so on. So that's the first thing I would say. But the other one I'd say is the student clubs. They're already, students are self-organizing into these clubs to do something. How can we use some of that energy? And we're not any good at it yet at U of T. We haven't figured out how to do that, but I think that's a real opportunity. 230 clubs, right, of students already doing stuff, not for pay, not for credit, just out of interest. So they're natural allies, and we should be trying to support them in some way. So that's a big question mark, you know, how, but I think there's something there. And then this student leadership subcommittee, I really like, because what we're saying to students is, what do you think would exhibit student leadership? Not us saying Campus as a Living Lab, come do our course, you know, et cetera. But you tell us a little bit about what student leadership might mean in sustainability. I think we're going to get into some very hairy issues in that process, right? And I can tell you, the people I report to are nervous about that idea. But I think that's really powerful if we can go somewhere on that. Is that a follow-on?
Hold on. I'm conscious of time, and some people may need to go. We're out of time. John, would you mind if we stay on an extra few minutes?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I talked too long anyway, so
brilliant. In which case,
we'll go back.
We've got Sam next, and then we'll come to Gonzalo and then Pete. Maybe should we take them in 3s? Do you think? Would that be helpful, John? Or
sorry?
Should we take the questions in groups? Do you think, or should we keep going one-to-one?
That requires a memory. So
we can keep going one-to-one.
I can pull out a memory aid piece of paper.
I have a sort of more, I guess, esoteric question, which is, if sustainability is a contested concept, sorry, I'm over here.
Yeah, sorry, I have a deaf ear,
That's
so
okay.
I can't tell direction of sound. So if I just hear a voice, I have no idea. So thanks.
So you mentioned that sustainability is like a contested concept.
Yes.
But we also need to make it invisible. So how do we balance those two things?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It starts as contested, but when it comes to implementation, you have to make a decision about what form of narrative you use. That's why I say each university should decide upon a narrative, and so that cuts through the contestation because we're pinning our view to one particular idea about sustainability. And then work towards implementation. But recognize there are different views out there. Like, I like the S word. Some people like the R word, resilience, right? And there's just all these different ways of approaching these things. I don't much care, because as long as we're kind of working in some kind of common direction, that remains to be seen in every case. So there's always a continuous discussion. But if the institution can come up with a narrative and say, this is what we mean by sustainability, that's very helpful, as long as it isn't seen as precluding alternative approaches from spontaneously emerging, in departments or whatever. So that's have my cake and eat it too answer.
Hi. Thank you. So I noticed in your presentation you mentioned a lot undergraduate students, and only at the very end you've mentioned postgraduate thought. So I wrote my question on, are there mindset differences between UG and PGT student attitudes towards sustainability? And this flows very close to the question that our colleague was asking as well.
So this is a personal opinion. Undergraduates are a little more flexible and open. Grad students are moving in the direction of faculty, so they're starting to become less flexible and more intransigent. And so they have their ideas, right? And that's good on them, right? That's what they're doing. They're actually doing, a PhD on a topic. They're really diving into it. So it seems to me that it is a different approach to them. With the undergraduates, it's offering opportunities to engage more. With the graduate students, it's finding ways to connect to their research interests.
I was, sorry, so perhaps I wasn't, my bad. So postgraduate thought is master students, not undergrad, it's not PhD students.
Oh, okay.
So, and it's really a question of, UG is a 3 to 4 year program, master programs are 1 to 2, and then the PhD is like forever 4 years.
Yeah, that's right. If you get through in 4, you're lucky in our circumstance. 6 is the average.
No.
So master students, I would say they're more like undergraduates because they've just recently been undergraduates, and a lot of master's programs are course heavy, so that's more like an undergraduate program also. They usually have a thesis unless they're professional master's degrees, but if they're professional master's degrees, often they're entirely course-based, where I come from. So that's much more like an undergraduate experience. It's just a slightly more senior level, hopefully, than the undergraduates. And they're a little more focused on their interests. But I think the approach can be very similar. PhD is more like postdocs and early career faculty. The only difference when you become faculty is you get paid for it instead of paying for it as a PhD student. So there's high overlap there.
Thanks. John, I remember working with you on the U7+ group a while back, and I'm one of those strange people who's an academic, interdisciplinary and experiential education specialist who works for the university. So I'm that very odd character, really. And I've worked in this world here at the university for 20 odd years, involved in various aspects of this. And I'm mindful that this is the city of the Enlightenment. This is where we should be coming up with brave new ideas. And the changes that I've seen have come about in 2 main ways. One is through appointments of people like Dave and our new principal, and another is through the student voice that's come through. And in your presentation, you've actually described this university in so many ways. I know it in intimate detail. We have all these structures, but we don't have a structure of the structures, which is what you have, and that I've been impressed with throughout. So I'd like, if you could, maybe to comment on how you build a structure of structures, and whether that, and then the timescales involved in doing so. And then finally, one thing you haven't mentioned is the bigger world of the political environment we work within. And feel free to just say, I'm not going to talk about that now because it's depressing. But actually globally, that's a major challenge. Now that's a whole different area. But it's the first bit, which is how we establish and we maintain that value system and we build the structure of structures. Thank you, John.
Okay, yeah, the third, the political context is what Matthew and Scott and I spend all lunch talking about. And it is a challenge right now, a terrible challenge. Yeah, I think you're right. I actually believe, I talked about the pincer movement. You need a whole institution entity. So we have our 3 sustainability offices, but they're on each campus. And they report up through the operational side to the VP operations, actually. And so they always have huge difficulty connecting to the academic agenda for reasons of the class system that I mentioned earlier. So I think you need something. I think it's very much like the debate we used to have in the 1970s. Do you want a ministry of the environment, or do you want environment in every ministry? Of course, it was the wrong question, because you have to have both. It's got to be embedded, so that's the embedding thing. But you've got to have that whole institution entity that has the mandate to oversee and speak for the institution and sort of monitor the institution and make sure things are happening. So when I came to U of T, we moved to Toronto. My wife got a job there. It was her turn to pick. So it wasn't a planned move on my side. But I phoned up Stephen Toop, who had been president of UBC, and he was now head of the Monk School, and said, could you use another faculty member? So this was not an organized move, but I had the chance to have a meeting with the president, Merrick Gertler, and I said, oh, look, all this exciting stuff with U of T could be, blah, blah. And deadpan response. Nothing happened for 12 months, so I thought, oh, well, I blew that meeting. And then he called me up and he said, would you like to be presidential advisor on the environment, climate change, and sustainability? And I'm going to give you a committee. None of the other presidential advisors had a committee. And so I thought, wow, this is a chance. Let's turn this into something. So I report as presidential advisor, and we report, Ron and I, as co-chairs of CECCS, directly to the president. And we said to him 4 years ago, we gave him 4 governance models: VP Sustainability, Associate Provost Sustainability A and B, slight differences, and the current model. And he said to me, and I think he was absolutely right, he said, look, if I put you in a vice presidential portfolio, you will be swamped with administrivia and engagement with the portfolio and the agenda and all of that stuff. Now you report right to me. You don't have to go through a vice president. So I think you should stay in that model. And at the time I thought, no, we wanted this move up, but I think he was right. And at UBC, we had what we called the UBC Sustainability Initiative. We chose the word initiative really carefully. It's not a unit, not a department, not a center. All those had meaning, right? And meant certain things. What's an initiative? Nobody knows. So we're free. So in both cases, it was really, I don't know, this may be my own personality defect, but I just find it liberating to have this. On the one hand, at UBC, I was Associate Provost Sustainability. So I was in the Provost's office, but I reported to the 3 key VPs, Operations, Research, and Academic Provost, and a rotating pair of deans. So again, it was very distributed in that it wasn't to the president. So very different. But it was similar in the way of having an institution-wide mandate, but pretty free to reach out and engage wherever we saw. At U of T, we have 4 staff. I mean, we only have 3 right now, but we're going to have 4. And we're not going to grow. So we're not creating an office, a center that's going to do a ton of things. We created Pathways program and all that curriculum stuff. That was us, but it has to move out. We can't run it. There's no way. So that's kind of how it's happened. And I think there's real opportunities if the senior manager of the university, the president or vice chancellor, or, you know, what principal, whatever it is, and the board of governors equivalent, or the Senate, or, you know, bicameral or unicameral, whoops. If once they agree to set up something like that, then it can take on a life of its own. But they need to buy into the idea of a whole institution approach, the need for something that speaks for the institution. Because, you know, most faculty know nothing about how the university functions, like nothing. Deans know quite a lot, unit chairs have to learn, but the average faculty member not only doesn't know, doesn't want to know, hold in contempt the very idea of learning, because my reward system is peer review externally, right? That's nothing to do with what goes on here. So there's this real difficulty, right? Every dollar that goes to the center is a waste. It's all those bureaucrats spending money. So you know, I had a friend who was vice president of research at UBC. He said, he was a chemist, came from chemistry. He said, when I joined the administration, I was seen as going to the dark side, you know? So that's the culture we have to deal with. And the best way to deal with it, I know, is John Holmberg's way. When he was VP of Sustainability at Chalmers in Gothenburg, he trained his staff. And they would go out and say, oh, Professor Davidson, I don't really know what you do. Can you tell me about your research? Instant popularity and instant lecture, right? 10 minutes later, you say, whoa, Professor Davidson, does that have anything to do with sustainability? 85% of the Professor Davidson said, does it have anything to do with it? It's crucial to sustainability, my research. And you've just enlisted them. So I'm overly simplistic. But, you know, we have to deal with that horizontality of you know, the plane of the faculty. So I think create something at the whole institutional level. Don't make it a huge, massive enterprise, or make it a huge, massive enterprise that somehow can float still across. You know, maybe that's workable. And then work really hard down at the bottom and building capacity in all these faculty and more rewardingly students and staff. I think that can work. I think, and I think we're ripe for it. All our students want more and more of this, right? We're not doing enough. That's their constant refrain. They're right. We should be doing more. So let's, you know, build on that. Let's use that energy. And I think most of our faculty and operational staff and administrative staff would agree. But they just don't have permission. They don't have the opportunity, you know, to take action. So that's what we can offer a little bit, because we think about this. This is our day job, right? Is to make opportunity for them. Anyway, sorry, going on, but.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
I'm conscious of time. Unless there is any more burning questions, I think we will relieve John and let you all go home probably about now. I just wanted to quickly say thank you so much to John for that presentation. I found it excellent. I know Dave did as well. I'm slightly worried he's gone away with another 20 different ideas for us to action over the next 12 months, so I'll blame you if that's the case. But thank you so much for your time. If we can all
my pleasure.